February 19th, 1946, Camp Meridian, POW Detachment, Washington. The hiss of the steam press ceased, replaced by the sharp clicking of boots on the wet concrete. Sato instinctively stepped in front of Emmy as the WAC captain entered the laundry. The air, heavy with industrial soap and damp wool, felt suddenly cold. Emmy flinched, her hand clutching a small, intricate scrap of lace. Contraband. On the wall, a stenciled sign declared, Rule 14, no alteration of issued materials. The captain tapped her clipboard. Routine inspection. Sato kept her voice low, a forced calm. She means no harm, Captain. This story explores the collision of worlds through the most mundane objects. If you value these hidden histories, consider following our channel and let us know which country's daily habits surprised you the most. 4 months earlier, Processing Center, Guam. The air was thick enough to drink, a humid blanket of salt and mold that clung to their skin the moment they stepped off the transport ship. Sato, who had once commanded an entire nursing wing, now stood clutching a canvas duffel bag containing only soap and a spare shift. Emmy, younger and smaller, trembled beside her, her eyes fixed on the razor wire glinting under the harsh tropical sun. Now, Washington State felt like a different planet. The cold of late autumn 1945 cut through Sato's thin fatigues as they were marched from the barracks to a long prefabricated building. Steam billowed from a metal chimney, smelling intensely of lye and scorched fabric. This was Camp Meridian. This was their new assignment. Inside, the noise was a physical assault. Giant metal drums tumbled, hissing and clanging, while massive steam presses slammed down with rhythmic violence. The heat was immediate and suffocating, fogging Sato's glasses. A young corporal, barely older than Emmy, shouted over the din, pointing at the machines. His words were meaningless, a harsh, barking sound. He gestured impatiently, demonstrating a lever. Sato watched his hands, not his face. It was the only way to learn. In the hospital, her hands had been precise, instruments of healing. Here they learned the crude mechanics of industrial labor. We must learn quickly, Sato murmured to Emmy in Japanese, keeping her voice low. Show utility. Do not be a burden. Emmy nodded, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of a sorting table. Her fear was palpable, a scent almost as strong as the industrial soap. The corporal supervised them for an hour, his irritation clear. He clearly did not want to be guarding 2 female prisoners in a laundry room. He gestured to a pile of rough-spun blankets. Fold, stack. Sato and Emmy obeyed with practiced efficiency. They were nurses. They knew how to fold linen. The corporal seemed fractionally satisfied and retreated to a stool by the door, lighting a cigarette. For 3 hours, they sorted heavy, damp towels and GI uniforms, their movements becoming mechanical. The work was grueling, but simple. Sato's initial fear began to recede, replaced by a dull ache in her lower back. It was humiliating, yes, to handle the linens of the victors, but it was survivable. It was simply fabric. Then, the corporal stubbed out his cigarette as a different soldier pushed a large canvas trolley into the room. The soldier exchanged a word with the corporal, laughed, and left. The corporal grunted, indicating the new trolley. Wax, he said. The word meant nothing to Sato. He pointed at them, then at the trolley. Process this. Sato approached the cart. This pile was different. The fabrics were finer, the colors varied, dark greens, tans, but also other things. She pulled out a standard khaki shirt, like the ones they had already seen. Then Emmy reached in. The girl froze. She lifted her hand slowly, as if she had been bitten by a snake. Dangling from her fingertips was an object of such baffling construction that Sato had no name for it. It was pale pink, made of a fabric smoother than anything Sato had touched in years, and held together by thin straps and delicate metal clips. It was structured with two pronounced armor-like cups. Emmy stared at it, her expression a mixture of profound confusion and violation. "Sensei," Emmy whispered, holding up the strange skeletal garment. What is this?" Sato took the object from Emmy's trembling hand. The girl flinched back, as if relieved to be rid of it. Sato held it up to the weak yellow light bulb that hung, caged, from the ceiling. Her first reaction was analytical. She was a nurse. She understood structure and function. This object had no function she could comprehend. It was a harness, a contraption. It was composed of multiple complex parts seemingly designed by an engineer. Two fabric cups were molded into a permanent convex shape, held rigid by a hidden crescent of wire. Thin, elastic straps, a wasteful use of rubber, fed into a series of tiny metal hooks and eyes. And then there was the fabric itself. Sato rubbed the material between her calloused thumb and forefinger. It was silk. Not the rough, functional silk salvaged for military use, but a fine, smooth weave that seemed impossibly delicate. Worse, it was adorned with strips of lace, a fragile netting of thread patterned into flowers. Lace, a material that served no purpose other than to be seen, yet this garment was clearly intended to be hidden. Sato's mind immediately contrasted it with her own sarashi. The sarashi was a single, long bolt of white cotton. It was pure function. It bound the body flat, tamed it, made it efficient for work. It was economical, durable, and honest. This pink contraption was its opposite. It was dishonest. It did not bind. It accentuated. It created a shape that was not natural. It was, Sato concluded, deeply frivolous. "Sensei," Emmy whispered again, watching Sato's face. "It is underclothing," Sato said, the word feeling strange. She looked back at the cart. Her stomach tightened. It was not one. The cart was full of them. They were spilled in a cascade of colors: pale blue, white, black, even a startling deep red. Dozens, perhaps 100. They were tangled with matching strips of delicate silk for the hips and sheer stockings made of a glossy fiber Sato had never seen before. This was not the aberration of a single decadent officer. This was an arsenal of frivolity. The shock was profound, settling in Sato's chest like cold dread. It was a violation of motenai, the guiding principle of their lives. Do not waste. Do not waste fabric. Do not waste food. Do not waste motion. The war had been defined by this philosophy. They saved tin foil and melted down temple bells for metal. And here, the enemy was manufacturing structured, wired, lace-adorned harnesses from strategic materials in vast quantities, only to hide them. "We cannot put these in the tumbler," Sato said, her voice sharp. The agitation of the large machines would shred the delicate lace and twist the wires. "They must be soaked by hand. Here, in this basin." It was an order, a return to the familiar structure of her old life. Emmy nodded, relieved to have a task. As Sato plunged the first aonguch into the hot, soapy water, she felt a simmering resentment. This was not strength. This was weakness. It was a moral failing, a rot at the core of the American soul. A nation that could afford this much systematic, engineered waste, she thought, with grim certainty, could not possibly possess the spiritual fortitude to sustain a true empire. They had won by brute force, but this was evidence of their decay. The work settled into a harsh rhythm, but nothing prepared them for Sunday. On that day, the trolleys arrived earlier, and they were heavier. The usual khaki and olive drab uniforms were replaced by an entirely different category of clothing. Sato, expecting perhaps a slightly better quality of cotton, was instead confronted with dresses made of dark wool, crepe, and even more silk. With them came an avalanche of the delicate, structured undergarments, this time accompanied by stockings, made of a material so sheer and fine it resembled a spider's web. Nylon, though Sato did not know the word. The corporal was more agitated than usual. He pointed to the clock on the wall. "Noon," he barked, making a sharp gesture. "Finished. Noon." The implication was clear. This was not just laundry. This was preparation for a ritual. Sato and Emmy worked with frantic energy. The steam presses hissed, the damp heat fogging the small, high windows. Sato focused on the intricate dresses, marveling at the complexity of the darts and seams, while Emmy, now resigned, handled the growing pile of aunguk and stockings at the hand-washing basin. The sheer volume was staggering. It seemed every woman on this base possessed an inexhaustible supply of these frivolous things. Sato felt the familiar resentment rise, sharper this time. In Japan, a new dress was a luxury that might mark a decade. Here, it was a weekly chore. As the morning wore on, the sounds from outside the laundry changed. The usual weekday sounds, the shouting of commands, the rumble of trucks, was replaced by a deeper quiet. And then, carried on the cold wind, another sound. Bells, distant, melodic, echoing from the town beyond the camp perimeter. Church bells. Sato paused, her hand resting on the hot handle of the press. She had not heard bells like that since before the fire raids. She remembered the bells of the shrines near her home, ringing for festivals. A sharp, painful memory of omatsuri, festivals, of street food and paper lanterns, pierced her. A life that no longer existed. A delicious scent wafted through a gap in the door, cinnamon and baked apples. It came from the main mess hall, a smell so incongruous with their reality of boiled rations that it felt like an act of aggression. Emmy looked up, her nose twitching. "Something smells good, Sensei." "Focus on the work," Sato snapped, more harshly than she intended. They finished the last piece just as the clock neared 12. The corporal inspected the neat stacks, grunted, and wheeled the carts out. Exhausted, Sato leaned against the sorting table, pushing her fogged glasses up. She glanced through the grime-streaked window, the one that overlooked a small patch of grass, separating them from the officers' quarters. A WAC captain, one whose severe black aonguk Sato had handled just an hour before, was standing outside. She was wearing one of the freshly pressed wool dresses. Her hair was immaculate. A young male soldier approached, holding something on a plate. He smiled at the captain, a wide, easy smile. He handed her the plate, which held a large slice of pie. The captain laughed, a light, genuine sound, and took it. Sato stared. She watched them stand in the weak sunlight, talking easily, sharing the pie. The decay she had diagnosed looked peaceful. It looked organized. It looked, she admitted with a sickening lurch, happy. The bells had stopped. The smells and the sounds coalesced into a single, devastating realization. For the victors, the world had not stopped. Their rituals continued. Their God was still in his heaven. Their decadence was not decay. It was simply normal. The revelation in the supply yard changed Sato. The resentment she had harbored toward the frivolous garments evaporated, replaced by a cold, obsessive curiosity. The enemy she thought she knew, decadent, weak, immoral, did not exist. In its place was something far more complex, an industrial behemoth capable of producing both unfathomable waste and terrifying efficiency. She had to understand. Her new mission began in the laundry. She started collecting the scraps of paper they found in the pockets of uniforms before washing, gum wrappers, receipts, and occasionally crumpled sections of newspapers. Most were useless, but she smoothed them out at night in the barracks, trying to decipher the English words she had begun to learn through sheer proximity. One evening, Emmy found a larger, mostly intact sheet lining the bottom of a waste bin. It was an editorial page from a local paper, perhaps the Tacoma News Tribune. Sato spent hours under her thin blanket, painstakingly translating the headline with a stub of pencil. Why are we coddling our enemies? The article was venomous. It spoke of the sacrifices of American boys, the atrocities committed by the Japanese Imperial Army, and the insult of housing captured soldiers on American soil. The author raged against the very idea that prisoners, Japs, the word stung even on the page, were being fed American food and clothed in American textiles. They deserve hard labor and harsh bread, the article concluded, not the comforts denied to our own returning heroes. Sato felt a chill deeper than the Washington night. This was the hatred she had expected. This was the enemy from the propaganda posters. The paper felt like a physical threat, confirming that the fragile civility of the camp was a lie, a thin veneer over a core of public animosity. If this editorial represented the true feelings of the town just beyond the wire, then their safety was precarious. Any small infraction, any complaint, could see their meager rations cut, their work doubled, or see them separated. She hid the paper, her heart heavy. The Americans were indeed the monsters she had been told. The next morning, the laundry was unusually cold. A pipe had frozen overnight, and the steam feeding the presses was weak, offering little of its usual suffocating warmth. Emmy, sensitive to the cold, was shivering visibly, her lips turning blue as she plunged her hands into the icy rinse basin. She tried to hide it, but her hands were shaking so badly she could barely wring out the heavy stockings. Corporal Evans sat on his stool by the door, reading a comic book. Sato watched him warily, the words of the editorial echoing in her mind. He hates us, she thought. He is just waiting for us to fail. Evans looked up from his comic, his gaze landing on Emmy. He watched her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Sato tensed, expecting a reprimand for the slow pace. Silently, Evans stood up. He walked not toward Emmy, but toward the main steam conduit in the corner of the room. He looked around, checking the corridor outside. Satisfied it was empty, he took a wrench from his belt and forcefully turned a large red valve marked with a warning stencil. A moment later, a loud rush of steam flooded the pipes. A wave of welcome, intense heat began to radiate into the room. It was far above the regulated temperature for the laundry. Evans returned to his stool and his comic book, not making eye contact with either of them. Sato stared at him, utterly bewildered. He had broken the rules, wasted fuel, defied regulations for no other reason than to stop a prisoner from shivering. He was the man described in the newspaper, the one who should despise her. Yet, he had shown a casual, almost indifferent act of kindness. The contradiction was absolute. The Aon Gooch had shown her an enemy of impossible wealth, the newspaper an enemy of pure hatred, and the corporal an enemy capable of quiet, inexplicable humanity. Sato felt dizzy. She did not know who these people were. The contradictions of the camp began to take a toll on Emmy. The physical labor, the cold, and the profound psychological dislocation had worn her down. One evening, Sato returned to the barracks to find the girl shivering uncontrollably under her thin blanket, her face flushed with fever. Sato's hand went immediately to Emmy's forehead. It was burning. The nurse in her took over instantly. Fever required cooling. She needed water and a cloth. Water was available from the washroom tap, but the cloth was a problem. Emmy's own sarashi, the only personal fabric she possessed, was stiff with accumulated sweat and lye soap residue. far too harsh for feverish skin. The standard issue camp towels were like rough wool. Sato felt a surge of professional frustration. She had set broken bones with bamboo splints and sutured wounds with sewing thread, but here she was powerless against a simple fever for want of a soft rag. Her mind turned to the laundry, to the mountains of soft cotton, silk, and nylon they handled every day. But taking one was unthinkable. It was theft of government property, an offense that would land her in solitary confinement. More terrifying, it would mean being separated from Emmy, leaving the girl alone and sick. Emmy moaned, her eyes squeezed shut. Cold. Sensei. Sato's resolve hardened. She would not let the girl suffer. She slipped out of the barracks and made her way back to the laundry building. It was dark, locked for the night, but she knew the corporal often left the back window unlatched. She slipped her fingers under the frame and pushed. It lifted with a soft scrape. Inside, the moonlight cast ghostly shadows over the silent, looming machines. The air was cold and still, smelling of soap and mildew. Near the presses was the discard pile, items too damaged to be mended, destined for the incinerator. Sato knelt beside it, her hands fumbling through the rejects. A sock with a large hole, a uniform shirt missing a sleeve, and then her fingers brushed against it. It was a piece of an aonguk, one of the complex structured ones. The straps were torn, and one of the wires had poked through the fabric, rendering it useless. But attached to the cup was a wide panel of lace. Sato's heart pounded. This was not just theft. It was the theft of the very symbol of American waste she had once despised. With a surge of guilt, she tore the lace panel from the garment, bunched the soft fabric in her hand, and slipped back out the window. Back in the barracks, she dipped the lace into her metal canteen cup. The material, which had seemed so uselessly fragile, became impossibly soft when wet. It held the cold water without dripping. She gently pressed the damp cloth to Emmy's forehead. The girl sighed, her trembling easing almost immediately. Sato sat in the dark, re-wetting the cloth, her gaze fixed on the intricate floral pattern, barely visible in the gloom. This object, born of a frivolous and wealthy industry, had just become a tool of healing. The lace was no longer a symbol of economic power or moral decay. It was a comfort. It was, in this moment, the only kindness the world had to offer. For the first time, Sato understood the human value of something soft, something made just for the sake of being gentle. Emmy's fever broke after 2 days, leaving her weak but clear-eyed. The incident with the soft lace cloth seemed to have changed something in her. She was still quiet, still obedient, but Sato noticed a new, secretive energy. Emmy's eyes, which had previously been fixed on the floor, now darted around the laundry room, scanning the discard pile with an unfamiliar intensity. She began volunteering to clear the trash bins. She lingered by the mending station. Sato, trained to observe the smallest changes in a patient, felt a prickle of alarm. Fear in the camp manifested in many ways: hoarding food, stealing, retreating into silence. This new behavior felt like hoarding. One evening, back in the barracks, Sato saw Emmy huddled in the darkest corner by her cot, long after the lights-out signal. Her back was to the room, her shoulders hunched. "Emmy," Sato said, her voice low and sharp. "What are you doing?" The girl started violently, trying to shove something under her thin mattress. "Show me. Now." Sato's tone was no longer that of a nurse. It was the sharp command of her former role as matron. Trembling, Emmy opened her hand. In her palm was a small, tangled nest of threads and several scraps of fabric, mostly the discarded lace trim and pieces of silk, collected from the incinerator pile. Sato felt a cold rush of anger, quickly followed by terror. "Baka! Idiot!" she hissed, grabbing Emmy's wrist. "Do you know what this is? This is contraband." She pointed to the wall of the barracks where the camp rules were posted in English and crude Japanese pictograms. Rule 14, Sato said, her voice shaking with fury. No alteration of issued materials. They call this sabotage. They call it stealing. Do you want them to search our beds? Do you want to be sent to solitary? Emmy flinched, tears welling. No, Sensei. Even Corporal Evans, Sato pressed on, the image of his kindness now a source of fear. The man who gave us heat. He will not help us if he thinks we are thieves. He will think we are ungrateful. He will think the Tribune article was right. Emmy began to cry silently, her thin shoulders shaking. It is not bad, she whispered. She held up her other hand, which had been concealed. In it was a small, crude figure. It was barely the length of Sato's thumb. Emmy had used a salvaged wire from an aonguch as a frame, padding it with cotton threads pulled from a rag. She had then carefully stitched a dress for it, fashioned entirely from the scraps of delicate lace. It was disproportionate, the head too large for the body, but it was unmistakably a doll. Sato stopped, her breath catching. Like the ladies, Emmy whispered, referencing the Sears catalog page they had found. In the pictures, they looked happy. Sato stared at the tiny figure. All her practiced anger, her fear of the rules evaporated. This was not sabotage. This was not theft. This was an act of creation. It was an attempt to reclaim a piece of humanity, to make something beautiful out of the literal scraps of their humiliation. Emmy had taken the symbol of American power, the waist, the lace, the wire, and transformed it into an object of comfort, a tiny effigy of hope. Sato felt a profound sense of shame for her outburst. She had been thinking of survival. Emmy had been thinking of living. Slowly, Sato closed Emmy's fingers over the doll. "You must hide this," she said, her voice no longer harsh, but thick with a new emotion. "Hide it where no one but you can find it. Do not let me see it again." Emmy looked up, her tear-filled eyes wide with relief and understanding. She nodded quickly. Sato returned to her cot, her heart pounding. The secret was no longer just Emmy's. It was hers, too. It happened on a Tuesday in February. Several months had passed, and the secret of the doll had become a fragile, shared silence between them. Emmy, emboldened, had even added a scrap of blue thread for hair. The laundry was oppressively hot, the air thick with the smell of industrial soap and damp wool. The rhythmic hiss-slam of the presses was the soundtrack to their lives. Corporal Evans was absent, replaced by a sullen private whom Sato had never seen before, a man who sat reading, pointedly ignoring them. In the relative privacy, Emmy had taken the doll out for a moment, smoothing its tiny lace skirt on the folding table. The main door flew open, slamming against the concrete wall. The hiss of the steam press ceased. The sudden silence was deafening, replaced by the sharp, authoritative clicking of boots on the wet floor. It was not Evans. It was a WWII captain, the same officer Sato had seen months before, the one who had received the pie. Today, she wore no smile. Her uniform was immaculate, her gaze sharp and assessing. She held a clipboard. Sato instinctively stepped in front of Emmy, a useless gesture of concealment. The air, seconds ago so hot, felt suddenly frigid. Emmy flinched, her hand crushing the small doll. The delicate wire frame, the contraband lace, it was all there, clenched in her fist. On the wall above her, the stenciled sign felt like a personal accusation. Rule 14, no alteration of issued materials. The captain's eyes swept the room. She noted the private, who had jumped to his feet, fumbling. She noted the stacks of laundry, the temperature gauges on the tumblers, and she noted the two prisoners. She noted Sato's rigid posture and Emmy, half-hidden, trembling. "Routine inspection," the captain said. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. She walked slowly down the line of machines, tapping the clipboard. Sato willed Emmy to drop the doll, to kick it under the table, to do anything. But the girl was paralyzed, her eyes wide with terror, fixed on the approaching officer. The captain stopped. She stopped directly in front of Emmy. The room was utterly silent, save for the drip of condensation from a pipe. The captain did not look at the doll. She looked directly into Emmy's eyes. Emmy, shrinking under the gaze, tried to hide her clenched fist behind her back. The captain saw the movement. "Soldier," she said, though Emmy was no soldier. "What are you concealing?" Emmy let out a small, terrified gasp, like an animal caught in a trap. She shook her head, unable to speak. "Open your hands, please." The please was not a request. It was the deadliest command Sato had ever heard. Emmy's face crumpled. This was it. Solitary. Separation. The loss of the fragile peace they had built. All for a tiny doll made of lace. Sato felt her own pulse hammering in her throat. She could not let Emmy face this alone. She had sanctioned this. She was the ranking nurse. She was responsible. Sato took one step forward, placing herself partially between the captain and the girl. She bowed her head, a formal gesture of respect, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Captain?" Sato kept her voice low, a forced, desperate calm. "She means no harm." The words hung in the steam-filled air. "She means no harm." Sato regretted them instantly. They sounded weak, pleading. The captain's gaze shifted from Emmy to Sato. It was an appraising look, cold and intelligent. It was the look of a person assessing a problem, not a person executing a rule. She held out her hand, palm up. "The object, please." Defeated, Amy's fingers uncurled. She placed the tiny doll into the captain's waiting glove. The captain looked down. Sato watched her face, searching for the expected flicker of disgust, anger, or even amusement. There was nothing. She simply observed the object. She noted the crude wire frame. She noted the carefully stitched dress, made from the forbidden lace. Her thumb gently brushed the doll's head. Emmy had stopped breathing. Sato felt her own body go rigid, bracing for the sentence. The private by the door had shifted, his hand moving toward his hip, as if anticipating trouble. The silence stretched. It was a new kind of power, not the industrial power of the endless Aonguch, but the absolute personal power of one human holding another's fate in her gloved hand. This captain, Sato realized, did not need to shout. Her silence was louder than any of the machines. Finally, the captain raised her eyes again to Emmy. "You made this?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, conversational. Emmy, terrified, could only manage a jerky nod. "From the scrap pile?" Another nod. The captain looked at the doll one last time. Sato saw, or perhaps imagined, the faintest softening around her mouth. "It's lovely," the captain said. The words were so unexpected that Sato was sure she had misheard. Lovely. A word of appreciation. A word of beauty. The captain then bent slightly at the knees, lowering herself to Emmy's eye level. She pressed the doll back into Emmy's trembling, open palm. "But do not let me see it again," she said. The voice was no longer conversational. It was a quiet, steel command. "Understood?" "Yes, Captain," Emmy whispered, her voice cracking. "Thank you, Captain." The captain stood, straightened her uniform, and gave Sato one last long look. It was a look that acknowledged everything: the rule-breaking, Sato's lie, the fear, and the warning. Then she turned on her heel. "Carry on," she said to the private. Her sharp, clicking footsteps receded. The door closed. For a full minute, neither Sato nor Emmy moved. The only sound was the drip, drip, drip of water from the pipes. Emmy was staring at her closed hand as if she were holding a live coal. Sato leaned back against the sorting table, her knees weak. The relief was so sudden, so profound, it left her dizzy. They had not been punished. The final shock had arrived. It was not the shock of industrial might, symbolized by the endless lace bras. It was not the shock of hatred, found in the newspaper. It was the shock of mercy. The captain had possessed the absolute right to enforce the rule, to punish them, to confirm their status as despised enemies. And she had, in that quiet moment, chosen not to. Sato finally understood. Power was not merely the ability to crush. Power, true American power, was the confidence to be lenient. It was a wealth of authority so vast that it could afford to give mercy away. Emmy carefully, almost reverently, hid the lace doll. Sato turned and reignited the steam press. The hiss, when it came, sounded like an exhalation. The announcement came in March 1946, carried on a day so bright and clear it felt unreal. Repatriation. The war was long over, and the complex machinery of sending the world's displaced people home had finally reached their small detachment. Sato had expected joy. She had expected tears of relief, a desperate yearning for home. She felt nothing but a hollow, cold apprehension. Home. The word itself was an abstraction. Home was a landscape of ashes, a nation occupied and starved, a people confronting a shame she was only beginning to understand. For months, her world had been defined by the concrete walls of the laundry, the hiss of steam, the cadence of American commands, and the baffling, ordered luxury of their captors. This camp, this prison, had become predictable. Its rules were known. Its dangers, like the WWII captain, had proven to be survivable, even humane. Home was the terror. Emmy was quiet, her hands nervously pleating, the hem of her fatigue shirt. She, too, seemed to feel the dread. "Sensei," she whispered one night in the barracks, "what will we eat? What is left?" Sato had no answer. She could only think of the Sears catalog, of the mountains of aonguk, of the casual abundance of pie and steam heat. How could they return to a place of total scarcity, now that they knew such wealth existed? How could they explain this impossible contradiction of a country, to those who had only known its bombs? On the final day, they were ordered to assemble by the main gate. Their duffel bags were impossibly light. A truck idled, its engine a low rumble against the silence of the morning. As they walked past the laundry building one last time, Sato saw a figure waiting for them. It was the WWII captain. She stood alone, clipboard absent, her posture as rigid as ever. Emmy flinched, instinctively stepping behind Sato as if expecting a final, delayed punishment. Sato merely stopped and waited. The captain did not speak for a moment. She simply looked at them. Then she stepped forward, addressing Emmy directly. "You will be a fine seamstress, I think," the captain said. She held out her gloved hand. In it was a small object, not a doll. It was a spool of fine white thread, and folded neatly beside it, a clean, new rectangle of white lace. Emmy stared, her mouth open. She did not dare take it. "A gift," the captain said, her voice softening almost imperceptibly. "For the journey." She pressed the items into Emmy's hand. This time, Emmy did not clench her fist. She accepted it. Sato looked at the captain. She saw the woman who enforced Rule 14. She saw the woman who had accepted pie on a Sunday. She saw the woman who had looked at a contraband doll and called it lovely. She saw the human being who understood, in that moment, that Emmy's creativity was not a crime, but a necessity. The gift was not just lace and thread. It was permission. It was a sanctioning of the human spirit. Slowly, Sato bowed. It was not the short, fearful nod of a prisoner. It was not the resentful bob of the conquered. It was the deep, formal, 90-degree bow of the ojigi, an expression of profound, complex respect. It was the bow of one professional acknowledging another. The captain seemed to understand. She gave a curt, respectful nod in return. "Good luck, ladies." Sato and Emmy turned and walked to the truck. As Emmy climbed in, she clutched the thread and the clean lace as if they were the most precious things in the world. The engine roared to life. As the truck pulled away, Sato looked back. She saw the wire fence, the steam rising from the laundry, and the captain, a solitary figure watching them go. Sato was leaving a prison, but she was not returning home as the same woman. She was a witness. She had seen the true nature of the enemy, a power built not only on steel and mass production, but on a terrifying, confident, and utterly incomprehensible capacity for mercy.